Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Better Late Than Never, a series where I play a bunch of old games that I never got around to playing and analyze them from a modern perspective. Now in the last two episodes, we took a deep dive into the world of Mario RPGs, but now it's time to parkour our way out of the Mushroom Kingdom and into the world of Mirror's Edge. Now, I recently caught a speedrun of Mirror's Edge at this year's Summer Games Done Quick, and I thought, hey, why haven't I played this yet? And so, here we are. So, what did I learn from this PS3-era action game 9 years after its release? Here are my 3 biggest takeaways from Mirror's Edge. Number 1, it's surprising that this style of action isn't more standard. These days, a lot of action games tend to look a lot like 2013's Tomb Raider reboot. They're filled with these massive action set pieces that require pretty limited interaction. Players basically tap buttons during interactive cutscenes, and cool things happen as a result. And sure, while that's all well and good, Mirror's Edge presented a kind of great alternative to that by centering its core mechanics around action instead. Now, this game is essentially one giant chase scene where you run away from dystopian cops or something. I don't really understand. Either way, you're bounding over city rooftops with finesse, and it's pretty cool. The tools and commands that you're given make for some pretty deeply satisfying gameplay because you actually get to do the cool things, not just trigger them. You're not just tapping X to set off a mini cinematic where your character leaps a fence, jumps off a crane, and rolls onto the ground below. You actually get to do all of that. It's funny because it wasn't a one-off idea in Mirror's Edge. Parkour mechanics were kind of trendy in this era, thanks to big games like Assassin's Creed. But the trend shifted as trends are wont to do. It's not that I don't like this style of cutscene-heavy action, it's just funny that Mirror's Edge showed the world how much more immersive action could be in games, and the industry kind of ignored it. But I do have some ideas as to why that is, so let's get to point number 2. Number 2, trust falls are very important. If you're a regular listener of the Left Trigger, Right Trigger podcast, then you've heard me rant about this point before. If not, hey, go listen to our podcast. But trust falls are important in games. If a game requires the player to take a lot of leaps of faith, they need to work, and Mirror's Edge struggles with that a bit. There were so many times where I'd be running from a barrage of gunfire. Cornered, I'd take a daring leap off a building, jump to a far ledge, and I'd fall to my death. Mirror's Edge is tight, but not always tight enough to make those moments pay off. I wanted to play at this really fast pace that the game felt like it should be played at, but after a series of mishaps, like the ironically named protagonist Faith failing to grab a pipe, I felt that momentum kind of halt. Every time I reached an edge, I'd have to stop and very carefully make my jump so I landed close enough to the ledge for a climb command to register in the game. Moments like this build trust between the player and developer, and when that trust is broken, a game's flow can kind of suffer for it. And in that sense, maybe cutscene action is safer because it's rarely ever going to disengage a player in that same way. And there's one more advantage to that style, which leads us to point number 3. Repetition is a tricky beast. Mirror's Edge's biggest flaw comes in how repetitive the gameplay starts to feel after a while. Now, as I noted, the mechanics are satisfying, but they get stale at a point. And I wondered why that is. I mean, in a lot of first-person shooters, all you do is shoot countless bad guys, and I don't often feel as restless as I did by the end of Mirror's Edge. Ultimately, I think that the problem is that Mirror's Edge doesn't give you enough to do with those mechanics. Now, take Portal, for example. You really only have one action in that game, to shoot a portal. But what the game does so well is to find many different ways to implement that idea. The types of puzzles you solve evolve and become more complex as you go. But in Mirror's Edge, nothing really changes. You run on rooftops, you platform your way up buildings, and you crawl through an endless number of identical air vents. There's a combat system to try and break things up, but it's not particularly good enough to serve as an exciting side mechanic. And maybe this is the ultimate advantage to that kind of Tomb Raider style. A character isn't limited to one set of actions. They can do really anything with the press of a few buttons. It's less limiting in that way, even if it's not as active an experience. Mirror's Edge is a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways, but it can also feel kind of claustrophobic once you've jumped across your 300th rooftop. Hey, maybe trends are trends for a reason. Well, I hope this episode has given you all enough to chew on. What style of action gameplay do you prefer? Let me know in the comments, and as always, make sure to subscribe to this channel for more episodes of Better Late Than Never. See you next time.